Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Humanities Cafe. I'm your host, Stacy Chidaushe, the program coordinator for the South Dakota Humanities Council, and I'm really excited about what we're talking about today. I don't think it's a huge secret that the Lakota language is listed as a critically endangered language, with approximately an estimated less than 1,500 fluent Lakota speakers, which in the big picture is less than 2% of the total Lakota population. Most of those fluent speakers are elders, so preserving and revitalizing the language is more important now than ever. There are different dialects of the Oceti-Sakowee language, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, and all are considered endangered. Today's discussion will focus on the most prevalent of those dialects, the Lakota language. But how do you revitalize a language that's been systematically stripped away from the people? The three amazing women joining us today are doing just that. And they're here to tell us about the efforts being made to preserve its use through the education of future generations. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. I'm honored to have you here. I'm just going to have you introduce yourselves, who you are, what you do, and anything you want to tell us about yourself. Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Right.
LaRayne Woster. Good afternoon. My name is LaRayne. I teach Lakota language and cultural studies at St. Joseph's Indian School in Chamberlain, South Dakota. I'm a member of the Rosebud tribe, born and raised there, and moved away at age 5. And as an adult, realized how much language and culture means to me as a person and a teacher. And so I've been teaching here at St. Joe's since 2002. And I'm a mom and a grandma and love what I do. So I'm happy to be here as well.
Thank you. Emmy, you're next on my screen. Do you want to go next?
Sorry, I lost my mouse there for a second. Emmy Her Many Horses Mașad Maĉpíya Lakļótiyapi wo echu wa iyangia hemacha. Ate wa ekin Randy Her Many Horses Chiapi, ina wa ekin Lucy Rifle Chiapi. Si chanchu na glala Lakota hemacha, si chanchu oyanke emataha na si chanchu Lakota oyate el mawapi. Hi everyone, my name is Emmy Her Many Horses Mașad. My parents are Randy and Lucy Her Many Horses. I am the Director of Lakota Language and Education at Thunder Valley in the Thunder Valley community near Porcupine, South Dakota. I am Sichanchu and Oglala Lakota. I was born and raised on the Rosebud Reservation where my mom's family is from. And now I reside in Pine Ridge on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I'm a citizen of the Rosebud Sioux tribe.
Thank you. Randilynn, you're up.
Iucha daya wachiankapi daya yahipi zitkana dutowi demie na isanti na sisitwa na shina hadecha oyate emataha. Eash wana waniatu wikjamana nupa sam nupa ki waziaha haded wati na wana Mamiejpíya Lúta Owáyawa itcha hemacha. Na michicha piki do wicha bluha na So hello everybody. My name is Randilynn Boucher-Giago. My Dakota name is Redbird Woman. I am Dakota from Santee and Sisseton, South Dakota. On my mother's side, I am Diné. I am an enrolled member of the Diné Nation. I have been living in Pine Ridge for the last 22 years. And in that time have also learned to speak Lakota, which is the medium of our language here. I work at Mamiejpíya Lúta Owáyawa. I oversee our K4 language immersion program. So I'm happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you so much, ladies. So it kind of sounds like a weird question to say, why is it so important to preserve the Lakota language? But I think all of us can relate to, I'm Italian American, and I don't think I'd know how to respond if somebody said, why is it so important for us to retain the Italian language? I mean, it's kind of a weird question, right? Because the indigenous languages and indigenous people are living culture. So we're going to skip the generals of why it's so important, but what are some of the specific things that are useful in terms of having that language there in terms of cultural preservation and sharing knowledge and history?
I'll share just some thoughts from a personal, passionate perspective, is that in order to live culture and be a part of culture and find out who you are, it's important to have that language connection. And the more you learn about our original people who were here on this beautiful land, you understand there's so many different aspects and ways to be a part of Lakota, Dakota, Nakota culture. And so if you're a powwow dancer, there's a language base to learn. If you're a ceremonial person and you follow that path, there are words that if you're going to learn them, but if you don't know them, it's hard to understand the really deep meaning of culture and language if you don't understand and know that language, because there are songs, there's just words that you use. And then you start adding in, okay, if I'm a teacher, I have to, and I think Randy and Emmy you guys are more immersion teachers. And so when you teach in that immersion, that's totally different than the way I'm teaching. But for me, coming back to culture and language as an adult is where I need to find out who I am. And it made sense when I started learning language. And then you realize the more you know, the more you don't know. And so trying to learn, and then you find out the meanings of words and how deep they are. That's the culture and the language that means a lot to me, where a word isn't just a made up word with some letters put together. Our language words have deep meaning. And so, for example, a computer is knowledge that goes round and round. It's, and so if you broke down the word computer, it might have meaning too. But to me, that meaning in Lakota, wa'unspe omanaye, wa'unspe is knowledge, omanaye, it goes around, and that's the internet. It's that knowledge that is going around. That's what I like about knowing our language and doing that. But if you're living a part of language and understanding who you are, it's important to know that language piece and keep learning and keep using, and being a part of that helps you be proud of who you are. And our way of life is growing, and we're growing in speakers and cultural people. And so that's my thought. Randy, Emmy, you can say.
I think that's always a question that comes up whenever we have visitors, is why is language critical to culture preservation? And the first thing that always comes to mind is when we put the language back in front of our children, we start to shift their thought process. No longer are they going to think with this English first, but we're giving them back that Lakota thought. And when we say that Lakota thinking, we're shifting back to a way that our relatives thought first. What does that thinking entail? When we think of Lakota, we think of the language, we think of the songs, we think of the prayer. We're reconnecting them back to the land. And so that's been my biggest component with the language, is helping our students understand that everything we do every day and what they know is not the norm of every other student within the community and the reservation. And so it's a lot of shifting. And what that does is it reconnects them to the land at a different level, in the sense of we're all relatives. It puts back in place that sense of kinship. With that kinship, we draw upon those responsibilities to community. And so through language, we do that. And so it's like there's nothing that can be separated from the language or the life ways because they both go hand in hand. In doing that, we develop their identity, we help them, and we support them in who they are. When they are strong in who they are, then they become stronger students. And so you see this continual impact in every aspect of how they exist with the language. It's not just within the classroom. It's about taking language back into spaces where language hasn't been for so many years. It's about showing these children that we can recreate the norm that their ancestors, that their relatives once had. And so when I don't like the word preservation, to be honest, I prefer to say we're retaking back what was ours and we're making our new norm through the language that ensures that everything is all in place. And so that has been our approach here, but even with my own children, and saying, this is your new norm. This is what belongs to you. And this is how you will identify through your language and your life way.
I like that too.
I resonate so much with what Randy just shared. I think a lot about the relationality that exists within our language. So we can't talk about the world around us without building relationships with things that in English thinking we think of as objects or subjects, but not as living beings in the same way that we think about other humans as living beings. And so in our language, that is something that is just a part of how we use language to think about and converse about the plant relatives, the animal relatives, the earth, everything around us. Even like there is relationality in the ways in which we engage in absolutely everything that we do. And so that is a big part of it for me, is that is embedded in how we use our language. I think that another piece of it for me is also that without our language, we don't have connections to some of this other knowledge that exists. I think in English, we think of language as one component, right? We think of it as one specific thing, but we don't think of it in relation to for people who attend church. That language can shift and change, and it doesn't make an impact on those spiritual relationships that we may have for those who attend Christian or follow Christian faith. But for us with the Lakota language, there are pieces of that that are so directly connected to our spirituality that it's essential that we maintain that, not only for us living today, but thinking generations into the future. So if we're passing on these teachings, if we're not passing on the language and ensuring that our children's children have access to that, what is going to be lost? What further disconnection is going to come for those future generations of our people because they no longer have access to that knowledge for what those words mean, for the true deep meaning of those words, the action in those words, not just the memorization of vocabulary or terminology, but truly understanding, again, those relationships that exist within our language with everything that goes into that speaking of our language.
Thank you. I loved all three of your comments on that, and I appreciate you explaining that in the way that you did, because the Lakota language dates back like 3,000 years, roughly, I'm supposing, within winter counts and things like that. But for those unfamiliar, what is the difference between the three dialects of Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota? Who wants to take that one? Randy, you're Dakota, right?
So from what my understanding and what I've been told is between the three dialects, Dakota is actually the oldest dialect. It's the original language. And from that came Nakota and Lakota. Lakota is the newest dialect of the people. And at one time, all of the people were Dakota. and they branched off from there. There might be some Lakotas who tell me I'm wrong, but this is from my understanding. And there's also a connection to a star constellation in Tchaiamani, and there's which is Orion's belt, that the 3 stars in that belt actually represent those 3 dialects of the language. So Dakota, Nakota, then Lakota. What makes them different is the way that is spoken. Each of the dialects can understand one another, yet they use different pronunciations within the language, and sometimes there's also different words. But the difference is those words are very descriptive, so we can understand each other. L speakers use an L, but not only L, but D speakers use a D, and then N speakers use N, and it's not just a transition between those letters itself, but there's also shifts within how words are said.
Can you give us an example of a word that would be something that would, just one word that in Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota, so people understand like what you meant by the L, the N, and the D?
So like for friend, kola would be Lakota. Dakota would be koda, and kona as Nakota. Same thing in like inila, to be quiet. Inina would be actually the same for both Dakota and Nakota. So it's just, that's where I say it's not always that exact word that switches, but there's certain ones that will switch over. Oh,
Thank you.
yes. There's an example there. So, and then it's just it's specific to communities as well. So the dialects will distinguish from the communities people come from. So here over where we're at in Ogallala territory, one community may speak different from another community in how they use transition words, but it's just specific to communities with language.
Thank you for that clarification. I think one of the things too that most people don't realize is that something unique about the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota languages is that they are traditionally an oral language, right? They weren't written. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, so a lot of the language was first documented in the early 1800s, actually in starting with the Dakota communities. That's when a lot of your I guess what the first settlers started to come in. The Dakota people were some of the first people who were in contact with them. And from that point, Riggs and a few others started to document the language. And so there's different dialects, and honestly, it just comes down to who started to document it. And that's where a lot of our orthography is based off of. Those orthographies are different. They're written the way they heard it, how they sounded, and that has become an issue for many different communities. But one of the things that, like you said, is when we go back to learning our language was oral. And working with students, I've always looked at orthography differently. And my thought is whatever orthography I put in front of my students, I want them to be able to read it, to say it and understand it. And I also want my students to use what works for them. And that's important, especially as we look at the role that it has played in Lakota language. Has it built us up or has it separated us? And how much power do we put into orally speaking, or how much power do we put into the orthography part of it?
Okay. So you mentioned history. We're talking a little bit about history here. So there are slightly more than 100 Native American languages spoken today, which is less than half of what existed before European colonization began. And most of the indigenous languages are in danger of extinction. But just for clarification purposes, was speaking and teaching Lakota, Dakota, Nakota illegal in the past, or is that the correct term to use, or why or why not? LaRayne, I'm gonna ask you this question because I know you have an answer for this one.
Okay. I have been looking into this in the last few months only because we did a podcast and somebody asked me, was the language illegal? And so what I found is that technically it may not have been listed as illegal, but when our culture was suppressed and students were literally beaten for speaking their language, and the kids could not speak it, they got in trouble for it. People who spoke it were arrested. In ceremonial form, if you sang, you could be arrested, and then from there, worse things happened. So was it illegal? I would say that makes it illegal, but in order for it to be legally taught in schools, if you have to make a policy that it's okay to use that language, that makes it sound like it was illegal. But it was all a part of our culture being made suppressed and a part of boarding schools and a part of the, you have a lot of acts that came into place, starting with the treaties and everything that happened. And then the boarding schools wanting to, have us change to live a different way of life. That's language. I mean, we kind of covered that in the beginning, that without language, you don't have a culture. And so when our culture was taken away, language is a part of that culture. And so making our way of life legal, whether it's 1968 Act or 78 or 1990 or those languages, creating a policy to make it legal makes it sound like it was illegal.
Thank you for that. And we touched on, the boarding schools. That was early 1870s, and then forced assimilation, removal. I mean, it was an asserted effort by the government to make sure that the languages of indigenous cultures didn't exist anymore. But how does that, for survivors of boarding schools and things like that, how does that intergenerational trauma play in the continued decline or loss of the Lakota language?
So I'll jump in here. So I think about this often. My grandmother was raised in a Lakota speaking home. I have the job I have now. I have several cousins who attend school and have participated in or grew up in the language nest at Mamiejpíya Lúta, and work at Mamiejpíya Lúta as well. And there was an instance where I was speaking with my grandmother. I talked to her regularly about my work and what we're doing with the children, where she said, well, I don't know why everyone wants to be Indian, because we didn't get to be Indian. Nobody wanted to be, right? And so these are pervasive ideas that live within the hearts of our elders, of our own families, that ask questions of like, why are we doing this? Because I didn't get to, which from me really sounds like a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, where she's not trying to criticize what we're doing. My cousin growing up speaking Lakota, right? My relatives and I who are teaching and working in these spaces, not trying to remove the value of the work that we're doing, but recognizing that hurt little girl inside of her. And so we have to, as we're navigating through even the work that we do every single day, those are experiences and things that live in not only our family members who are still alive and our ancestors who have passed on, but those are also things that come into our bodies when we're born, and that pain and that hurt that many Lakota learners who are adults, not the little babies that we're raising up in our language nests. In the Montessori, we operate here at Thunder Valley, but in those of us who are adults and still constantly on a learning journey because we didn't have that opportunity to grow up in our language. And so I think about that a lot, about how she still, my own grandmother, loves me and is proud of the work that we're doing here, but is also hurt in the ways that she is trying to engage with me in conversations about the work that we're doing, when she cannot bring herself most of the time to be speaking Lakota aloud, even if she knows what's being said, even if she knows what's going on, that those are fairly common experiences of people in our communities, but also within our own families. And so that, and the families of our students as well, where people are like, well, why are you sending your child through an immersion program? Why do they need to speak Lakota? That's not going to help them. And having to like grapple through these challenges that are pervasive across all of our communities.
Is that, and from what I'm hearing from you, Emmy, is that it's kind of the whole point of, you can't teach the language without teaching the culture, and vice versa, right? So you almost have to have that language piece in there. Okay, so I'm gonna start picking on you ladies one at a time, because you each have wonderful programs that I want people to know about them. And LaRayne, I'm going to start with you first, because you're at St. Joseph's Indian School. Can you tell us a little bit, just tell us about St. Joseph's first.
St. Joseph's is a residential school. If you look at our list of boarding schools from a government perspective, we are on the boarding school list of schools, but there's just a few details about it for why we are. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. But through our history, we have a lot of documentation. So before language was being taught in other schools in the 1970s, we had two people who came to St. Joe's, and I wrote their names down. Because I want to give them credit. And they came here, and before the 78 Act, Harold and Geraldine Condon, they were a married couple, and they were okay to teach language here at St. Joe's. So in the 70s, before it became legal, it was being taught here. We also have proof that in the 1930s, there was an Maƴpíya ceremony that happened here on campus. So as a school and as a mission, there are different things that people might view us as, or what we are doing. It's changed over a lot of the years. But I think what's most important to know is we're a private residential school. We don't get government funding or state funding, and we follow state standards. So our kids who go to school here, they live here, but they can go home with family. They still go by attendance guidelines and those kind of things. But we get to add culture and language and other classes that we want into our curriculum. And our kids live here in a home, they live in a home with about 12 other kids. They have 2 to 3 house parents in that home. And like I said, families can come visit, they can come pick up the kids and take them home anytime, but they do have to have school attendance. We aren't year round. The kids have a break. We have a fall break coming up here towards the end of November, where all the kids will get to go home. So we have that freedom to teach what we want. So when I came here in 2002, knowing what had been taught before me, I taught culture and infused language with that culture. And also that in 2012, 2013, we flipped that around, and we're teaching language, but culture is infused into that, and depending on the curriculum that we use. So when we teach the kinship words, we teach about kinship, but they're also learning the words. In the past, it would be, we're going to learn about the Lakota moons, and you're just going to learn the names. Whereas now, you're learning the names, and how do we say what is the Lakota moon, or this is the meaning behind it. So I wasn't the original starter of it. There were people doing these things and beadwork and prayer activities well before I was even born. Things were happening here. But for my curriculum, we have 1st through 8th grade twice a week. We don't have them every day, which is what would be great. Our high school kids live here on campus in homes of 12 as well, and they attend the public school. So they're learning to transition into public school life, so to speak, and most of them really, really like that, and they get to be in other activities, and then we have them once a month for class. So we think about, we're planting seeds, whereas when our like Emmy, your grandma, she knows and speaks the language. My mom went to boarding school at age 4, but I only heard her speak the language with her mom and her aunt. She didn't speak it to me. So we're all at a different level of boarding school survivor mode, depending on where we are. And so I get to take that and put that pride back into our kids, where I mean, almost to the point where learn your language because you can, and be proud of it. But we also talk about those people who couldn't, so there's just so much. It's a little bit of everything. So anyway, we get to have our high school kids, but high school kids can also take an online class. So just planting seeds and doing other things. And we have a lot of other activities other than in the classroom that we do here at St. Joe as well. We have Inippi that we do for the kids right here on campus. We have at Mass, the kids, we use the drum. We have a drum group. The kids get to dance when we have Mass here. We take the kids out on trips, so they're not just being taught here at school. We take them to the Black Hills and to Montana, where they can see places where our people succeeded and lived in a good way. And the kids will come back and teach about that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with that. And then we do fun stuff like playing hand games. We have on campus, we have street names that are in Lakota in English. So we have Maļpíya Lúta Drive, and then underneath it says, Red Cloud. Our museum on campus, I mean, it's a museum, so it does a lot of teaching and things, but in the summertime, they have a reading time where I go over there and I'll read a book. Some of them are, varied books from different Lakota authors, but in Lakota and some in English. So we do a lot of things within the community. We go out and share about dancing. We have a powwow here. And then we have a summer camp on campus too that teaches language. And for 2 weeks, kids will come from Lower Brule for the day. And then for the next 2 weeks, kids will come from Fort Thompson for the day. And my co-teacher, Charla Krogman, is doing that summer camp program, and she and Nancy LeBeau do the language portion of the summer camp for a month. So we do a lot of fun stuff, just trying to bring all of that back. And within our school, our teachers also teach the Oceti Shakoi Essential Understandings that are state standards. And then we also have a Lakota Word Wednesday, and the kids get to do that. So they record it. And we tell them, this is yours, it belongs to you. So just giving them that belonging piece and sharing that with the world. So.
And I did put a link to Hochoka, your podcast. I put a link to that in the chat too, because I watched a couple of episodes of it, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I watched it for several hours. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you need to allot some time to go through them all because there's so much to learn. And the programs that you have there are just great. And I know it's different because you have them, you said twice a week?
The podcast.
No, the students. Do you have, you
yeah.
teach classes twice a week?
Yeah.
And that makes, I'm sure, a little bit more challenging than you'd like it to be. What are the goals? I mean, do you have hopes and goals and what you'd like to expand the program?
I think originally the goal was that I would be able to create conversation for the kids. I've been to Mamiejpíya Lúta. We were invited there to be a part of their buffalo hunt. And so I will explain to our kids, when we went to Mamiejpíya Lúta, hearing the high school boys walk up to each other and fist pump and, Dokash, hey, Hihani Washte, how are you? And they have this carried on conversation. That's what I would like. I want them to be able to create conversation and then grow with that. But I'm doing that by planting seeds. And like Randy said, that they can read. Some of them are memorizing words and using it, but that they can read and continue to learn from what we are giving them. And a good example of that, students come in and say, "Ampetu washte Mamiejpíya," and I'll say, "Oh, Ampetu washte." And then I would put the word Mamiejpíya up on the board, and it's hard for them to sound it out and read it. So there's that oral learning, and then there's that learning how to sound it out and then writing it. And so we're planting seeds, but having them create conversation. But also to the point, I know our volleyball team wants to use some Lakota words when they play volleyball, and that could help their winning. The other team doesn't know what they're saying if you're using Lakota language. So you almost have to go, hey, you can use this in a competitive way and do well. So we're planting seeds, and I tell my kids, right now you're nervous. We're all learning. But when you become an adult, you're going to have these foundational skills that if you want to continue on doing this language learning and speaking and living your culture and living your life the way you want to, you'll have these. And we also have our computer teacher created lessons where the kids have to use the Lakota language keyboard in order to type. And they were increasing to, 30, 40 words a minute, which is amazing. And so I try to explain, that's a job you might have someday. I mean, if somebody went to Mamiejpíya Lúta or Thunder Valley and could type the lessons out for somebody using that keyboard, what a job that would be. So those are my passions and feelings, but I just want my kids to know who they are from a cultural perspective and use what they're learning in whatever way to be proud of who they are.
Okay. And one last question that's a little bit geared specifically to you, because as you mentioned, St. Joe's is a residential school, but it's listed as a boarding school. And so at St. Joe's specifically, you're teaching a language that 50 years ago wasn't even allowed to be spoken in Indian boarding schools. What does that mean to you that you get to do that?
Great pride. It's amazing. And I don't think our kids realize from any tribal perspective teaching what they're getting until they become adults. And right now they're thinking, okay, I gotta do this, or but I think if we keep teaching them the way as much as we can and getting them to understand who they are and creating that pride, it will grow in learning from them. And then as they become adults, that thought process is maybe going to change of You know, we were told to say we're not Indian or that you're not Lakota, pretend you're something else. That will switch and our kids will be, you know, yeah, I am Lakota, I'm Dakota, I'm from here, and things will change. So
Thank you for that. I'm gonna we're running low on time already. So Randy, I'm gonna move over to you. Tell us a little about Maļpíya Lúta Owáyawa. Owáyawa. Sorry, I always get that Owáyawa wrong, but sorry about that. Tell us a little bit about your school and what you're doing there.
So Maļpíya Lúta actually started from an immersion daycare back in 2011 with a group of students and parents who said they wanted their children to start learning in the language. Each year that group of students grew, or I should say children grew until there was a cohort of about 20 students. And in 2016, the partnership with Red Cloud was actually established. And I started as an immersion parent, so I kind of have a history of where it all began. It was we as parents made a decision that we wanted our children to continue within the language. And so schools were approached within the community to see who would allow us to do a track of an immersion program. Maļpíya Lúta at that time was Red Cloud. Red Cloud is a former boarding school, agreed to take in our students. And that was the beginning in 2016 was the first track of a multi-age classroom. They had kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And at that time, my daughter, my second oldest, was a part of the program. So I was very involved with the class and, you know, what was happening. From the very beginning, the students were introduced to the Lakota language from the time they were 18 months. And so all of their instruction for K through 2 were in the Lakota language. The first few years when it was first established at Maļpíya Lúta, the school asked if we would assess the students in English to see how they were performing and how they were doing. And it was through these assessments that they started to see that our students in the immersion multi-age classroom were outperforming the English-speaking classrooms. And so from that impact, they started to transition Maļpíya Lúta over to full-on immersion. And from that point, those initial students who first started are now 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And so it's been a long journey, but what we've seen with our program is that the language is crucial in their education and their academic learning, as well as developing critical thinking. So our program is established as a dual immersion. So our medium language is Lakota. Our students' instruction in all subject areas are in Lakota. Reading, writing, conversation is Lakota based. And so when the students come in, a lot of times most people are familiar with students going in for 45 minutes of Lakota during the day, maybe like had mentioned 2 times a week, whereas all instruction here is we're actually right now at a 90-10, 90 Lakota, 10% English. This model has helped us push our students to speaking. And our program is actually set up, our curriculum is based on a 4-season approach, which means that it's in line with land-based learning. That land-based learning is a reflection of our traditional calendar, and how we how we teach them is the same traditional calendar that we follow. That is tied into South Dakota state standards, as well as OSEU standards as well. So it makes for like a very dynamic curriculum, which has been a work in progress. So when in the background, I was a teacher before I was admin. During that time, curriculum was crucial in setting it up for our students. And so we are now at a point now where we have our curriculum set for the students to follow for every subject area, to be taught through a cultural-based learning, land-based learning, through TPRS and TPR. Those are our main learning methods, as well as a lot of project-based learning. With language instruction, those are key for acquisition of the language and engaging the students. And so that's kind of how our program is set up. Some just kind of looking at your questions, some of the challenges that we do face is just, English is everywhere. And so when you're constantly creating a space for the Lakota language to thrive and to be, we're constantly working on creating those domains for our students and allowing them to have these spaces where the language can be. So when we think of our school, that is the domain of our school. It's the Lakota language. But when our students transition home or they transition into community, that has been one of the challenges that I don't want to say it's a challenge, but it's one of those areas that we focus on to ensure that when our students go into these spaces, the language is there. And so I feel that if we take the domain language, if we take the language into these different domains, then we're allowing the students to see the language in other places besides school. And then for activities outside of the classroom, we do a lot of cultural engagement, kind of very similar to what you were talking about. We do have a lot of different activities that happen monthly. We do thematic units every month that are tied into each season and what's happening around us. These go into deeper teachings of the history, the knowledge of the land, what we should be preparing for, what each of the months represent, what's happening, different historical years that the students will be learning about. So it's kind of like there's always a sense of engagement. They're learning through traditional stories. They are working with first language speaking elders in the classroom. So there's this constant flow of knowledge coming in and ensuring that they have natural speech patterns, as well as our teachers is another like development skill that we work on. Like, how do we support our teachers to ensure our teachers are engaging our students and how our teachers are growing their language skills? So it's like a multifaceted program where we're constantly not only thinking about the children, our instruction, curriculum, teachers, elders, the land, like there's a constant working order that ensures everything continues to go on. So.
Okay. There is a question from Tara in the chat, and Valerie, I saw yours. I'm going to come back to it. Tara asks, are your resources for learning available for off-reservation use of enrolled members?
Everything we create from our curriculum is open sourced. We know how hard it is to find curriculum and get curriculum, and a lot of curriculum we've created. And so we have it open sourced on our website. If you go to mamiejpiyaLúta.org, you go to the schools, and then you can actually access our curriculum from there. Everything we create is open sourced.
And I did put a link to that in the chat too already. So go ahead and check that out. Your website is great. I clicked around through it, and you're doing a lot of great things there. I want to get to Emmy next, because Thunder Valley is doing great stuff too, because you're not just in the school, you're in the community. So we went from, a couple of times a week that LaRayne has with the kids to dual immersion with Randy. So what is Thunder Valley doing?
So Thunder Valley is a community development corporation located in the Thunder Valley community on the Pioneers Reservation. I'm going to give a brief overview of the entire organization. So we have 5 initiatives that do a number of different kinds of work, one of which is Lakota language and education. Then we have regenerative community development, which has housing and also thinks deeply about our relationship with the earth and our community and our responsibilities to care for that. We have our youth leadership development initiative, which works with young people in our community, doing a lot of summer programming based in culture and community and those responsibilities. And then we have our Lakota Land Systems program, which grew from our food sovereignty initiative. Next year, we will be welcoming bison onto a range near Thunder Valley, which will also be supporting feeding our children in our school. We have a demonstration farm here locally where we have our children each year. We utilize different ceremonial foods from that demonstration farm in order to support different aspects of our learning throughout the year. And then we have the Lakota Advocacy Center, which works deeply with ecological teachings, working on a seed library and providing that education for our students as well. And then also looking at supporting community-led action in our communities and across the state. So going back into the work that LLE does, the bulk of our work is our Lakota Immersion Montessori, which we have here on site. In previous years, we have had partnerships with Mamiejpíya Lúta, partnerships with Pine Ridge School, and just this last year, or 2 years ago, we did purchase another building to have our entire program here on site, which is a very new development. And so we have 3 classrooms for our Lakota Immersion Montessori. We have our toddler classroom, which is 1 to 3-year-olds. We have our primary classroom, which is 3 to 6-year-olds, and our elementary classroom, which is 6 to 9-year-old students from our community here. These classrooms are immersion classrooms where we work with multi-age. Each of the classrooms is multi-age, and we have students sometimes transitioning between 2 over the course of a whole year. Those programs are developed to be child-led, really leaning into the interests and gifts that our students bring into the classrooms, so that we can kind of foster that in our students, because we know we need every kind of person in our society to be able to thrive. We need every kind of person speaking Lakota so that we can offer those opportunities in every kind of employment, in every kind of interest area where we're speaking Lakota as adults. So we need Lakota speaking grocery store clerks. We need Lakota speaking scientists. We need Lakota speaking musicians. So we want to support all of that in our students. We utilize the Montessori method, which is very different from our traditional education system. Because it is child-led, it doesn't always align directly to where our state standards are. And so that is a little bit different than what we see in other schools. With this approach, a lot of our learning is project-based. A lot of our learning is looking at that relationality that we have with the world around us, and kind of leaning into those relationships that we will have with the bison that are going to be on our range near Thunder Valley community, leaning into those relationships with our plant relatives that are just outside the school or in our school garden or in the greenhouse at Thunder Valley. How are we engaging with the children so that they understand and embody that relationality that we want them to carry into their future and instill in future generations as well. With this approach, we also, I'm trying to talk as fast as I can because I know we're running out of time. With this approach, we also have different kinds of relationships with elders in our community. We have a fluent speaker who works in our program. Martha is amazing. I know she's had some relationships with Mamiejpíya Lúta as well, and has touched so many of our children here within our community in making an impact, helped to support curriculum development, all of those things. But we also host an annual elder retreat with a very small group of elders, where we are trying to learn, like, what do we need to carry forward into the future, because every elder is their own library, right? Even if we have these fluent speakers, they may not carry knowledge that another fluent speaker has carried and has had passed on to them. And so with this elder retreat, we gather elders and we really recognize the gift that they're bringing there with us, the gifts that they're sharing for our children and for their own children and communities, and are really taking that time to learn, okay, we know what we think should go in the curriculum, but what do you think we need to have in there? What do you see as a critical skill and critical knowledge for us to pass on to future generations? And so really leaning into that. That is a multi-day event where we bring the elders together and host this event. And we're really using that to help support and be the foundation of the ongoing curriculum development as our school ages up into working with older students, is helping us to build that foundation, asking now, like, what do we need to ensure that our adolescent children know before they go on into adulthood? Also, what teachings do we need to be providing for parents who may have been disconnected to some of these teachings? And how, like, what are the ways that we historically have done that? How can we bring that into present day and into the future so that as many people as possible have access to that knowledge? And what are our responsibilities also as the Tui and Lekshi in our classrooms in passing on that knowledge as well? So what are our responsibilities to our students, and recognizing those pieces of it? And so we really lean into that with the Elder Retreat. I know we're running short on time. And then we have language programming that we do with our staff here as well, where we have individualized learning plans that are instituted with each of our staff because they are on different levels in their learning journey. And we want to ensure that we're also recognizing the harms that have impacted our ability to learn and speak the language, so that everyone feels confident in doing that with their students and aren't carrying that pain and that hurt into their classrooms, but really leaning into our responsibility to each individual educator as well, in order to help support their language development in a way that is healing those parts of them that may have been harmed in the past or in their genealogy, and just recognizing that piece of it. We also provide different supports for our parents in language learning and different aspects of like cultural education for our families, so that they can provide some of these teachings and gifts for their children that maybe they as children didn't get to grow up with, and ensuring that we're instilling that with our families.
Wonderful. And I think what I'm hearing too, through all of what all three of you ladies are doing with the work you do, the word healing is really there. You're not just healing individuals, you're healing an entire culture. And I commend you all for that so much. I wish we had more time. We are out of time, and I wish we had another hour, because boy, we could talk about this for a while. So I want to thank our guests today, LaRayne, Emmy, Randy. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us. I hope you'll come back and join us again in a couple weeks. We're going to continue our acknowledgement of Native American Heritage Month, where we're going to have Dr. Rosie Sprague and Luke Blackelk, who's a chef and an educator with Natives, and Sean Sherman, come and talk to us about Thanksgiving and how do we need to correct the narrative to get the story right, and how can we celebrate Thanksgiving in a way that honors our Indigenous people. So I hope you can come back and join us in a couple of weeks. Ladies, continue the wonderful work that you do. We're all watching in awe from afar, and we appreciate you. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Happy fall, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.